More William Part 3. William lay on the floor of the barn, engrossed in a book. This was a rare thing with William. His bottle of lemonade lay untouched by his side, and he even forgot the half-eaten apple which reposed in his hand. His jaws were arrested midway in the act of munching. Our hero, he read, was awakened about midnight by the sound of the rattling of chains. Raising himself on his arm, he gazed into the darkness. About a foot from his bed he could discern a tall, white, faintly gleaming figure and a ghostly arm which beckoned him. William's hair stood on end. "Crumbs!" he ejaculated. Nothing perturbed, he continued to read. Our hero rose and followed the spectre through the long winding passages of the old castle. Whenever he hesitated, a white, luminous arm, hung around with ghostly chains, beckoned him on. "Gosh," murmured the enthralled William. "I'd have been scared." At the panel in the wall the ghost stopped, and silently the panel slid aside, revealing a flight of stone steps. Down this went the apparition, followed by our intrepid hero. There was a small stone chamber at the bottom, and into this the rays of moonlight poured, revealing a skeleton in a sitting attitude beside a chest of golden sovereigns. The gold gleamed in the moonlight. "Wow!" gasped William, red with excitement. "William!" The cry came from somewhere in the sunny garden outside. William frowned sternly, took another bite of apple, and continued to read. Our hero gave a cry of astonishment. "Yeah, I'd have done that all right," agreed William. "William!" "Oh, shut up," called William irritably, thereby revealing his hiding place. His grown-up sister, Ethel, appeared in the doorway. "Mother wants you," she announced. "Well, I cannot come. I'm busy," said William, coldly, taking a draught of lemonade and returning to his book. "Cousin Mildred's come," continued his sister. William raised his freckled face from his book. "Well, I cannot help that, can I?" he said, with the air of one arguing patiently with a lunatic. Ethel shrugged her shoulders and departed. "He's reading some old book in the barn," he heard her announce, and he says. Here he foresaw complications and hastily followed her. "Well, I'm coming, aren't I?" he said, "as fast as I can." Cousin Mildred was sitting on the lawn. She was elderly and very thin and very tall, and she wore a curious, long, shapeless garment of green silk with a golden belt. "Dear child," she murmured, taking the grimy hand that William held out to her in dignified silence. He was cheered by the sight of tea and hot cakes. Cousin Mildred ate little but talked much. "I'm living in hopes of a psychic revelation, dear," she said to William's mother. "In hopes? I've heard of wonderful experiences, but so far none, alas, have befallen me. Automatic writing I have tried, but any communication the spirits may have sent me that way remained illegible, quite illegible." She sighed. William eyed her with scorn while he consumed reckless quantities of hot cakes. "I would love to have a psychic revelation," she sighed again. "Yes, dear," murmured Mrs. Brown, mystified. "William, you've had enough." "Enough?" said William, in surprise. "Why, I've only had..." He decided hastily against exact statistics and in favor of vague generalities. "I've only had hardly any," he said, aggrievedly. "You've had enough, anyway," said Mrs. Brown firmly. The martyr rose, pale but proud. "Well, can I go then, if I cannot have any more tea? There's plenty of bread and butter." "I don't want bread and butter," he said, scornfully. "Dear child," murmured Cousin Mildred, vaguely, as he departed. He returned to the story and lemonade and apple, and stretched himself happily at full length in the shady barn. But the ghostly visitor seemed to be fading away, and with a soft sigh was gone. Our hero, with a start of surprise, realized that he was alone with the gold and the skeleton. For the first time he experienced a thrill of cold fear and slowly retreated up the stairs before the hollow and, as it seemed, vindictive stare of the grinning skeleton. "I wonder what he was grinning at," said William. But to his horror the door was shut, the panel had slid back. He had no means of opening it. He was imprisoned on a remote part of the castle, where even the servants came but rarely, and at intervals of weeks. Would his fate be that of the man whose bones gleamed white in the moonlight? "Crumbs," said William, earnestly. Then a shadow fell upon the floor of the barn, and Cousin Mildred's voice greeted him. "So you're here, dear? I'm just exploring your garden and thinking. I like to be alone. I see that you are the same, dear child." "I'm reading," said William, with icy dignity. "Dear boy, won't you come and show me the garden and your favorite nooks and corners?" William looked at her thin, vague, amiable face, and shut his book with a resigned sigh. "All right," he said. He conducted her in patient silence round the kitchen garden and the shrubbery. She looked sadly at the house, with its red brick, uncompromisingly modern appearance. "William, I wish your house was old," she said, sadly. William resented any criticism of his house from outsiders. Personally, he considered newness in a house an attraction, but, if anyone wished for age, then old his house should be. "Old," he ejaculated. "Huh. I guess it's old enough." "Oh, is it?" she said, delighted. "Restored recently, I suppose?" "Umph," agreed William, nodding. "Oh, I'm so glad. I may have some psychic revelation here, then?" "Oh yes," said William, judicially. "I shouldn't wonder." "William, have you ever had one?" "Well," said William, guardedly, "I don't know." His mysterious manner threw her into a transport. "Of course not to anyone. But to me, I'm one of the sympathetic. To me you may speak freely, William." William, feeling that his ignorance could no longer be hidden by words, maintained a discreet silence. To me it shall be sacred, William. I will tell no one, not even your parents. I believe that children see clouds of glory and all that, vaguely, with your unstained childish vision. I'm 11, put in William indignantly. You see things that to the wise are sealed. Some manifestation, some spirit, some ghostly visitor. Oh, said William, suddenly enlightened, you talking about ghosts? Yes, ghosts, William. Her air of deference flattered him. She evidently expected great things of him. Great things she should have. At the best of times with William, imagination was stronger than cold facts. He gave a short laugh. Oh, ghost. Yes, I've seen some of them. I guess I have. Her face lit up. Will you tell me some of your experiences, William? She said, humbly. Well, said William, loftily, you won't go talking about it, will you? Oh, no. Well, I've seen them, you know. Chains and all. And skeletons. And ghostly arms beckoning and all that. William was enjoying himself. He walked with a swagger. He almost believed what he said. She gasped. Oh, go on, she said. Tell me all. He went on. He soared aloft on the wings of imagination, his hands in his pockets, his freckled face puckered up in frowning mental effort. He certainly enjoyed himself. If only some of it could happen to me, breathed his friend. Does it come to you at nights, William? Yes, nodded William. Nights mostly. I shall watch tonight, said Cousin Mildred. And you say the house is old? Awful old, said William, reassuringly. Her attitude to William was a relief to the rest of the family. Visitors sometimes objected to William. She seems to have almost taken to William, said his mother, with a note of unflattering disbelief in her voice. William was pleased yet embarrassed by her attentions. It was a strange experience to him to be accepted by a grown-up as a fellow being. She talked to him with interest and a certain humility. She bought him sweets and seemed pleased that he accepted them. She went for walks with him, and evidently took his constrained silence for the silence of depth and wisdom. Beneath his embarrassment he was certainly pleased and flattered. She seemed to prefer his company to that of Ethel. That was one in the eye for Ethel. But he felt that something was expected from him in return for all this kindness and attention. William was a sportsman. He decided to supply it. He took a book of ghost stories from the juvenile library at school, and read them in the privacy of his room at night. Many were the thrilling adventures which he had to tell to Cousin Mildred in the morning. Cousin Mildred believed in everything. She supplied him with sweets on a generous scale. She listened to him with awe and wonder. William, you are one of the elect, the chosen, she said, one of those whose spirits can break down the barrier between the unseen world and ours with ease. And always she sighed and stroked back her thin locks, sadly. Oh, how I wish that some experience would happen to me. One morning, after the gift of an exceptionally large tin of sweets, William's noblest feelings were aroused. Manfully he decided that something should happen to her. Cousin Mildred slept in the bedroom above William's. Descent from one window to the other was easy, but ascent was difficult. That night Cousin Mildred awoke suddenly as the clock struck 12. There was no moon, and only dimly did she discern the white figure that stood in the light of the window. She sat up, quivering with eagerness. Her short, thin little pigtail stuck out horizontally from her head. Her mouth was wide open. "Oh," she gasped. The white figure moved a step forward and coughed nervously. Cousin Mildred clasped her hands. "Speak," she said, in a tense whisper. "Oh, speak. Some message. Some revelation." William was speechless. None of the ghosts he had read of had spoken. They had rattled and groaned and beckoned, but they had not spoken. He tried groaning and emitted a sound faintly reminiscent of a sea-sick voyager. "Oh, speak," pleaded Cousin Mildred. Evidently speech was a necessary part of this performance. William wondered whether ghosts spoke English or a language of their own. He inclined to the latter view and nobly took the plunge. "Honk, yonk, ponk," he said, firmly. Cousin Mildred gasped in wonder. "Oh, explain," she pleaded, ardently. "Explain in our poor human speech. Some message." William took fright. It was all turning out to be much more complicated than he had expected. He hastily passed through the room and out of the door, closing it noisily behind him. As he ran along the passage came a sound like a crash of thunder. Outside in the passage were Cousin Mildred's boots, William's father's boots, and William's brother's boots, and into these charged William in his headlong retreat. They slid noisily along the polished wooden surface of the floor, hitting into each other as they went. Doors opened suddenly and William's father collided with William's brother in the dark passage, where they wrestled fiercely before they discovered each other's identity. "I heard that confounded noise and I came out." "So did I." "Well, then, who made it? Who did? If it's that wretched boy up to any tricks again." William's father left the sentence unfinished, but went with determined tread towards his younger son's room. William was discovered, carefully spreading a sheet over his bed and smoothing it down. Mr. Brown, roused from his placid slumbers, was a sight to make a brave man quail, but the glance that William turned upon him was innocent and sweet. "Did you make that confounded row kicking boots about the passage?" shouted the man of wrath. "No, father," said William, gently. "I've not been kicking no boots about." "Were you down on the lower landing just now?" said Mr. Brown, with compressed fury. William considered this question silently for a few seconds, then spoke up brightly and innocently. "I don't know, Father. You see, some folks walk in their sleep and when they wake up they don't know where they've been. Why, I've heard of a man walking down a fire escape in his sleep, and then he woke up and couldn't think how he'd got to be there where he was. You see, he didn't know he'd walked down all them steps sound asleep, and—" "Be quiet," thundered his father. "What in the name of what on earth are you doing making your bed in the middle of the night? Are you insane?" William, perfectly composed, tucked in one end of his sheet. "No, Father, I'm not insane. My sheet just fell off me in the night and I got out to pick it up. I must have been a bit restless, I suppose. Sheets come off easy when folks is restless in bed, and they don't know anything about it till they wake up, just same as sleepwalking. Why, I've heard of folks—" "Be quiet." At that moment William's mother arrived, placid as ever, in her dressing gown, carrying a candle. "Look at him," said Mr. Brown, pointing at the meek-looking William. "He plays football up and down the passage with the boots all night and then he begins to make his bed. He's mad. William turned his calm gaze upon him. "I wasn't playing football with the boots, Father," he said, patiently. Mrs. Brown laid her hand soothingly upon her husband's arm. "You know, dear," she said, gently, "a house is always full of noises at night. Basket chairs creaking." Mr. Brown's face grew purple. "Basket chairs," he exploded, violently, but allowed himself to be led unresisting from the room. William finished his bed, making with his usual frown of concentration, then, lying down, fell at once into the deep sleep of childish innocence. But Cousin Mildred was lying awake, a blissful smile upon her lips. She, too, was now one of the elect, the chosen. Her rather deaf ears had caught the sound of supernatural thunder as her ghostly visitor departed, and she had beamed with ecstatic joy. "Honk," she murmured, dreamily. "Honk, yonk, ponk." William felt rather tired the next evening. Cousin Mildred had departed, leaving him a handsome present of a large box of chocolates. William had consumed these with undue haste in view of possible maternal interference. His broken night was telling upon his spirits. He felt distinctly depressed and saw the world through jaundiced eyes. "It's a rotten world," he said, gloomily. "I've took a lot of trouble over her and she goes and makes me feel sick with chocolates." Jumble wagged his tail, sympathetically. William was frankly bored. School always bored him. He disliked facts, and he disliked being tied down to detail, and he disliked answering questions. As a politician, a great future would have lain before him. William attended a mixed school because his parents hoped that feminine influence might have a mellowing effect upon his character. As yet the mellowing was not apparent. He was roused from his day dreams by a change in the voice of Miss Dewhurst, his form mistress. It was evident that she was not talking about the exports of England, a subject in which William took little interest, any longer. "Children," she said brightly, "I want to have a little May Queen for the 1st of May. The rest of you must be her courtiers. I want you all to vote tomorrow. Put down on a piece of paper the name of the little girl you think would make the sweetest little queen, and the rest of you shall be her followers." "We're going to have a May Queen," remarked William to his family at dinner, "and I'm going to be a follower." His interest died down considerably when he discovered the meaning of the word follower. "Isn't it no sort of animal at all?" he asked indignantly. "Well, I'm not going to be in it, then," he said when he heard that it was not. The next morning Evangeline Fish began to canvass for votes methodically. Evangeline Fish was very fair, and was dressed always in that shade of blue that shrieks aloud to the heavens and puts the skies to shame. She was considered the beauty of the form. "I'll give you 2 bull's eyes if you'll vote for me," she said to William. "2," said William with scorn. "6," she bargained. "All right," he said, "you can give me 6 bull's eyes if you want. There's nothing to stop you giving me 6 bull's eyes if you want, is there? Not that I know of. But you'll have to promise to put down my name on the paper if I give you 6 bull's eyes," she said suspiciously. "All right," said William. "I can easy promise that." Whereupon she handed over the 6 bull's eyes. William returned one as being under regulation size, and waited frowning till she replaced it by a larger one. "Now, you've promised," said Evangeline Fish. "They'll make you ill and die if you break your promise on them." William kept his promise with true political address. He wrote "E. Fish I don't think" on his voting paper and his vote was disqualified. But Evangeline Fish was elected May Queen by an overwhelming majority. She was, after all, the beauty of the form and she always wore blue. And now she was to be May Queen. Her prestige was established forever. "Little angel," murmured the elder girls. The small boys fought for her favors. William began to dislike her intensely. Her voice, and her smile, and her ringlets, and her blue dress began to jar upon his nerves. And when anything began to jar on William's nerves, something always happened. It was not till about a week later that he noticed Bettine Franklin. Bettine was small and dark. There was nothing angelic about her. William had noticed her vaguely in school before and had hardly looked upon her as a distinct personality. But one recreation in the playground he stood leaning against the wall by himself, scowling at Evangeline Fish. She was surrounded by a crowd of admirers, and was talking to them in her angelic voice. "I'm going to be dressed in white with a blue sash. Blue suits me, you know. I'm so fair." She tossed back a ringlet. "One of you will have to hold my train and the rest must dance round me. I'm going to have a crown, and she turned round in order to avoid the scowling gaze of William in the distance. William had discovered that his scowl annoyed her, and since then had given it little rest. But there was no satisfaction in scowling at the back of her well-curled head, so he relaxed his scowl and let his gaze wander round the playground. And it fell upon Bettine. Bettine was also standing by herself and gazing at Evangeline Fish. But she was not scowling. She was looking at Evangeline Fish with wistful envy. For Evangeline Fish was angelic and a May Queen, and she was neither of these things. William strolled over and lolled against the wall next to her. "Hello," he said, without looking at her, for this change of position had brought him again within range of Evangeline Fish's eye, and he was once more simply one concentrated scowl. "Hello," murmured Bettine shyly and politely. "You like pink rock?" was William's next effort. Said Bettine, nodding emphatically. "I'll give you some next time I buy some," said William grandly, "but I shan't be buying any for a long time," he added bitterly. "'Cause an old ball slipped out my hands on to our dining room window before I noticed it yesterday." She nodded understandingly. "I don't mind," she said sweetly. "I'll like you just as much if you don't ever give me any rock." William blushed. "I didn't know you liked me," he said. "I do," she said fervently. "I like your face and I like the things you say." William had forgotten to scowl. He was one flaming mixture of embarrassment and delight. He plunged his hands into his pockets and brought out 2 marbles, a piece of clay, and a broken toy gun. "You can have them all," he said in reckless generosity. "You keep them for me," said Bettine sweetly. "I hope you dance next me at the maypole when Evangeline's queen. Won't it be lovely?" And she sighed. "Lovely," exploded William. "Huh. Won't you like it?" said Bettine wonderingly. "Me," exploded William again. "Dancing round a pole. Round that old girl? But she's so pretty." "No, she isn't," said William firmly. "She just isn't. Not much. I don't like her nasty shiny hair, and I don't like her nasty blue clothes, and I don't like her nasty face, and I don't like her nasty white shoes, nor her nasty necklaces, nor her nasty squeaky voice." He paused. Bettine drew a deep breath. "Go on some more," she said. "I like listening to you." "Do you like her?" said William. "No. She's awful greedy." "Did you know she was awful greedy?" "I can believe it," said William. "I can believe anything of anyone what talks in that squeaky voice. Just watch her when she's eating cakes. She goes on eating and eating and eating. She'll bust and die one day then," prophesied William solemnly, "and I shan't be sorry. But she'll look ever so beautiful when she's a May Queen." "You'd look nicer," said William. Bettine's small pale face flamed. "Oh no," she said. "Would you like to be a May Queen?" "Oh, yes," she said. Said William, and returned to upsetting Evangeline Fish by his steady concentrated scowl. The next day he had the opportunity of watching her eating cakes. They met at the birthday party of a mutual classmate, and Evangeline Fish took her stand by the table and consumed cakes with a perseverance and determination worthy of a nobler cause. William accorded her a certain grudging admiration. Not once did she falter or faint. Iced cakes, cream cakes, pastries melted away before her, and never did she lose her ethereal angelic appearance. Tight golden ringlets, blue eyes, faintly flushed cheeks, vivid pale blue dress remained immaculate and unruffled, and still she ate cakes. William watched her in amazement, forgetting even to scowl at her. Her capacity for cakes exceeded even William's, and his was no mean one. They had a rehearsal of the maypole dance and crowning the next day. "I want William Brown to hold the Queen's train," said Miss Dewhurst. "Me?" ejaculated William in horror. "Do you mean me?" "Yes, dear. It's a great honor to be asked to hold little Queen Evangeline's train. I'm sure you feel very proud. You must be her little courtier." Said William, transferring his scowl to Miss Dewhurst. Evangeline beamed. She wanted William's admiration. William was the only boy in the form who was not her slave. She smiled at William sweetly. "I'm not good at holding trains," said William. "I don't like holding trains. I've never been taught about holding trains. I might do it wrong on the day and spoil it all. I shan't /X92T like to spoil it all," he added virtuously. "Oh, we'll have heaps of practices," said Miss Dewhurst brightly. As he was going, Bettine pressed a small apple into his hand. "A present for you," she murmured. "I saved it from my dinner." He was touched. "I'll give you something tomorrow," he said, adding hastily, "if I can find anything." They stood in silence till he had finished his apple. "I've left a lot on the core," he said in a tone of unusual politeness, handing it to her. "Would you like to finish it?" "No, thank you." "William, you'll look so nice holding her train." "I don't want to, and I bet I won't." "You don't know the things I can do," he said darkly. "Oh, William," she gasped in awe and admiration. "I'd hold your train if you was going to be queen," he volunteered. "I wouldn't want you to hold my train," she said earnestly. I'd want you to be May King with me." "Yes." "Why don't they have May Kings?" said William, stung by this insult to his sex. "Why shouldn't there be a May King?" "I spec they do, really, only perhaps Miss Dewhurst doesn't know about it." "Well, it doesn't seem sense not having May Kings, does it? I wouldn't mind being May King if you was May Queen." The rehearsal was, on the whole, a failure. In the end he was degraded from the position of train bearer to that of ordinary follower. The boys were to be dressed in smocks and the girls in print dresses, and the maypole dance was to be performed round Evangeline Fish, who was to stand in queenly attire by the pole in the middle. All the village was to be invited. At the end of the rehearsal, William came upon Bettine, once more gazing wistfully at Evangeline Fish, who was strutting around, with many tosses of the fair ringlets, before a crowd of admirers. "Isn't it lovely for her to be May Queen?" said Bettine. "She's a rotten one," said William. "I'm jolly glad I've not to hold up her rotten old train and listen to her nasty squeaky voice singing close to, and I'll give you a present tomorrow." He did. He found a centipede in the garden and pressed it into her hand on the way to school. "They're jolly interesting," he said. "Put it in a match box and make holes for its breath and it'll live ever so long. It won't bite you if you hold it the right way." And because she loved William, she took it without even a shudder. Evangeline Fish began to pursue William. She grudged him bitterly to Bettine. She turned around near him in her sky-blue garments. She tossed her ringlets about him. She looked at him with her pale blue eyes. And in the long school hours during which he dreamed at his desk, or played games with his friends, while highly paid instructors poured forth their wisdom for his benefit, William evolved a plan. Unfortunately, like most plans, it required capital, and William had no capital. Occasionally William's elder brother Robert would supply a few shillings without inconvenient questions, but it happened that Robert was ignoring William's existence at that time. For Robert had, not for the first time, discovered his ideal, and the ideal had been asked to lunch the previous week. He had reserved some of his fervor for the cook. She must have a proper lunch, not stews and stuff they often had. There must be 3 vegetables and there must be cheese straws. Cook must learn to make better cheese straws. And William, having swallowed insults for 3 whole days, planned vengeance. It was a vengeance which only William could have planned or carried out. For only William could have seized a moment just before lunch when the meal was dished up and cook happened to be out of the kitchen to carry the principal dishes down to the coal cellar and conceal them beneath the best nuts. It is well to draw a veil over the next half hour. Both William and the meal had vanished. Robert tore his hair and appealed vainly to the heavens. He hinted darkly at suicide. For what is cold tongue and coffee to offer to an ideal? The meal was discovered during the afternoon in its resting place and given to William's mongrel, Jumble, who crept about during the next few days in the agonies of stomachache. Robert had bitterly demanded of William why he went about the world spoiling people's lives and ruining their happiness. Whence it came that William, optimist though he was, felt that any appeal to Robert for funds would be inopportune, to say the least of it. But Providence was on William's side for once. An old uncle came to tea and gave William 5 shillings. "Going to dance at a maypole, I hear," he chuckled. "Perhaps," was all William said. His family were relieved by his meekness with regard to the May Day festival. Sometimes William made such a foolish fuss about being dressed up and performing in public. "You know, "Dear," said his mother, "it's a dear old festival, and quite an honor to take part in it, and a smock is quite a nice manly garment." "Yes, mother," said William. The day was fine, a real May Day. The maypole was fixed up in the field near the school, and the little performers were to change in the schoolroom. William went out with his brown paper parcel of stage properties under his arm and stood gazing up the road by which Evangeline Fish must come to the school. For Evangeline Fish would have to pass his gate. Soon he saw her, her pale blue radiant in the sun. "Hello," he greeted her. She smiled shyly. She had won him at last. "Waiting to walk to the school with me, William," she said. He still loitered. "You're awful early." "Am I? I thought I was late." "I meant to be late." "I don't want to be too early. I'm the most important person, and I want to walk in after the others, then they'll all look at me." She tossed her tightly wrought curls. "Come into our old shed a minute," said William. "I've got a present for you." She blushed and looked at him. "Oh, William," she said, and followed him into the wood shed. "Look," he said. His uncle's 5 shillings had been well expended. Rows of cakes lay round the shed, pastries, and sugar cakes, and iced cakes, and currant cakes. "Have a lot," said William. "They're all for you. Go on. Eat them all. You can eat and eat and eat. There's lots and lots of time, and they cannot begin without you, can they?" "Oh, William," she said. She gloated over them. "Oh, may I?" "There's heaps of time," said William. "Go on. Eat them all." Her greedy little eyes seemed to stand out of her head. "Oh," she said in rapture. She sat down on the floor and began to eat, lost to everything but icing and currants and pastry. William made for the door, then he paused, gazed wistfully at the feast, stepped back, and, grabbing a cream bun in each hand, crept quietly away. Bettine in her print frock was at the door of the school. "Hurry up," she said anxiously. "You're going to be late. The others are all out. They're waiting to begin. Miss Dewhurst's out there. They're all come but you and the Queen. I stayed 'cause you asked me to stay to help you." He came in and shut the door. "You're going to be May Queen," he announced firmly. "Me?" she said in amazement. "Yes. And I'm going to be king." He unwrapped his parcel. "Look," he said. He had ransacked his sister's bedroom. Once Ethel had been to a fancy dress dance as a fairy. Over Bettine's print frock he drew a crumpled gauze slip with wings, torn in several places. On her brow he placed a shining crown. And she quivered with happiness. "Oh, how lovely," she said. "How lovely. How lovely." His own preparations were simpler. He tied a red sash that he had taken off his sister's hat over his right shoulder and under his left arm on the top of his smock. Then he took a piece of burnt cork from his parcel and solemnly drew a fierce and military moustache upon his cheek and lip. To William, no kind of drama was complete without a corked moustache. Then he took Bettine by the hand and led her out to the maypole. The dancers were all waiting, holding the ribbons. The audience was assembled and a murmur of conversation was rising from it. It ceased abruptly as William and Bettine appeared. William's father, mother, and sister were in the front row. Robert was not there. Robert had declined to come to anything in which that little wretch was to perform. He jolly well had enough of that little wretch to last his lifetime. Thank you very much. William and Bettine stepped solemnly hand in hand upon the little platform which had been provided for the May Queen. Miss Dewhurst, who was chatting amicably to the parents till the last of her small performers should appear, seemed suddenly turned to stone, with mouth gaping and eyes wide. The old fiddler, who was rather short-sighted, struck up the strains, and the dancers began to dance. The audience relaxed, leaning back in their chairs to enjoy the scene. Miss Dewhurst was still frozen. There were murmured comments. How curious to have that boy there. A sort of attendant, I suppose. Yes, perhaps he's something allegorical. A sort of pageant. Good luck or something. It's not quite the sort of thing I expected, I must admit. What do you think of the Queen's dress? I always thought Miss Dewhurst had better taste. Rather tasteless, I call it. I think the moustache is a mistake. It gives quite a common look to the whole thing. I wonder who is meant to be. Pan, do you think? Uncertainly. Oh, no, nothing so pagan, I hope, said an elderly matron, horrified. He's that brown boy, you know. There always seems to be something queer about anything he's in. I've noticed it often. But I hope he's meant to be something more Christian than Pan, though one never knows in these days, she added darkly. William's sister had recognized her possessions, and was gasping in anger. William's father, who knew William, was smiling sardonically. William's mother was smiling proudly. You're always running down William, she said to the world in general, but look at him now. He's got a very important part, and he said nothing about it at home. I call it very nice and modest of him. And what a dear little girl. Bettine, standing on the platform with William's hand holding hers and the maypole dancers dancing round her, was radiant with pride and happiness. And Evangeline Fish in the wood shed was just beginning the last currant cake. William was a scout. The fact was well known. There was no one within a 5-mile radius of William's home who did not know it. Sensitive old ladies had fled shuddering from their front windows when William marched down the street singing, the word is a euphemism, his scout songs in his strong young voice. Even the return of her cat a few weeks later did not remove the hostility from her gaze whenever it happened to rest upon William. William's family had welcomed the suggestion of William's becoming a scout. "It will keep him out of mischief," they had said. They were notoriously optimistic where William was concerned. William's elder brother only was doubtful. "You know what William is," he said, and in that dark saying much was contained. Things went fairly smoothly for some time. He took the Scout's law of a daily deed of kindness in its most literal sense. He was to do one, and one only, deed of kindness a day. There were times when he forced complete strangers, much to their embarrassment, to be the unwilling recipients of his deed of kindness. There were times when he answered any demand for help with a cold, "No, I've done it today." He received with saint-like patience the eloquence of his elder sister when she found her silk scarf tied into innumerable knots. "Well, they're jolly good knots," was all he said. He had been looking forward to the holidays for a long time. He was to go under canvas at the end of the first week. The first day of the holidays began badly. William's father had been disturbed by William, whose room was just above and who had spent most of the night performing gymnastics as instructed by his scout master. No, he didn't say do it at nights, but he said do it. He said it would make us grow up strong men. "Don't you want me to grow up a strong man?" He's ever so strong and he did them. "Why shouldn't I?" His mother found a pan with the bottom burnt out and at once accused William of the crime. William could not deny it. "Well, I was making something he'd told us and I forgot it." "Well, I've got to make things if I'm a scout. I didn't mean to forget it. I won't forget it next time. It's a rotten pan, anyway, to burn itself into a hold just for that." At this point William's father received a note from a neighbor whose garden adjoined William's and whose life had been rendered intolerable by William's efforts upon his bugle. The bugle was confiscated. Darkness descended upon William's soul. "Well," he muttered, "I'm going under canvas next week and I'm jolly glad I'm going. Perhaps you'll be sorry when I'm gone." He went out into the garden and stood gazing moodily into space, his hands in the pocket of his short scout trousers, for William dressed on any and every occasion in his official costume. "Cannot even have the bugle," he complained to the landscape. "Cannot even use their rotten old pans. Cannot tie knots in any of their old things. What's the good of being a scout?" His indignation grew and with it a desire to be avenged upon his family. "I'd like to do something," he confided to a rose bush with a ferocious scowl. "Something just to show them." Then his face brightened. He had an idea. He set off cheerfully down the drive. He decided to stay away for lunch and tea and supper, and to return at dusk to a penitent, conscience-stricken family. He first made his way to a neighboring wood, where he arranged a pile of twigs for a fire, but they refused to light, even with the aid of the match that William found in the bottom of one of his pockets. Slightly dispirited, He turned his attention to his handkerchief and tied knots in it till it gave way under the strain. William's handkerchiefs, being regularly used to perform the functions of blotting paper among other duties not generally entrusted to handkerchiefs, were always in the last stages of decay. He felt rather bored and began to wonder whether it was lunch time or not. He then scouted the wood and by his wood lore traced 3 distinct savage tribes' passage through the wood and found the tracks of several elephants. He engaged in deadly warfare with about half a dozen lions, then tired of the sport. His mother would recall the scene over the pan and her heart would fail her. His father would think with shame of his conduct in the matter of the bugle. Poor William! How cruel we were! How different we shall be if only he comes home! He could almost hear the words. Perhaps his mother was weeping now. His father, wild-eyed and white-lipped, was pacing his study, waiting for news, eager to atone for his unkindness to his missing son. Perhaps he had the bugle on the table ready to give back to him. Perhaps he'd even bought him a new one. He imagined the scene of his return. He would be nobly forgiving. He would accept the gift of the new bugle without a word of reproach. His heart thrilled at the thought of it. He was getting jolly hungry. It must be after lunch time. But it would spoil it all to go home too early. Here he caught sight of a minute figure regarding him with a steady gaze and holding a paper bag in one hand. William stared down at him. "What you dressed up like that for?" said the apparition, with a touch of scorn in his voice. William looked down at his sacred uniform and scowled. "I'm a scout," he said loftily. "Scout," repeated the apparition, with an air of polite boredom. "What's your name?" "William." "Mine's Thomas. Will you catch me a wasp? Look at my wasp." He opened the bag slightly and William caught sight of a crowd of wasps buzzing about inside the bag. "Want more?" demanded the infant. "Want lots more. Look. Snails." He brought out a handful of snails from a miniature pocket and put them on the ground. "Watch them put their horns out. Watch them walk. Look. They're walking. They're walking." His voice was a scream of ecstasy. He took them up and returned them to their pocket. From another he drew out a wriggling mass. "Wood lice," he explained, casually. "Got worms in another pocket." He returned the wood lice to his pocket except one, which he held between a finger and thumb laid thoughtfully against his lip. "Want wasps now? You get them for me." William roused himself from his bewilderment. How do you catch them?" he said. "Wings," replied Thomas. "Get hold of their wings and they don't sting. Sometimes they do, though," he added casually. "Then your hands go big." A wasp settled near him, and very neatly the young naturalist picked him up and put him in his paper prison. "Now you get one," he ordered William. William, determined not to be beaten by this minute but dauntless stranger. As a wasp obligingly settled on a flower near him, he put out his hand, only to withdraw it with a yell of pain and apply it to his mouth. "Oh, you," he said. "Crumbs." Thomas emitted a burst of laughter. "You stung," he said. "Did it sting you?" Funny. William's expression of rage and pain was exquisite to him. "Come on, boy," he ordered at last. "Let's go somewhere else." William's bewildered dignity made a last stand. "You can go," he said. "I'm playing by myself." "All right," agreed Thomas. "You play by yourself and me play by myself, and we'll be together playing by ourselves." He set off down a path, and meekly William followed. It must be jolly late, almost tea time. "I'm hungry," said Thomas suddenly. "Give me some breakfast." "I haven't got any," said William irritably. "Well, find some," persisted the infant. "I cannot. There isn't any to find." "Well, buy some." "I haven't any money." "Well, buy some money." Goaded, William turned on him. "Go away," he bellowed. Thomas's blue eyes, beneath a mop of curls, met his coldly. "Don't talk so loud," he said sternly. "There's some blackberries there. You can get me some blackberries." William began to walk away, but Thomas trotted by his side. "There," he persisted. "Just where I'm pointing. Lovely great big huge ones. Get them for my breakfast." Reluctantly the scout turned to perform his deed of kindness. Thomas consumed blackberries faster than William could gather them. "Up there," he commanded. "No, the one right up there I want. I want it quick, I've eaten all the others." William was scratched and breathless, and his shirt was torn when at last the hungry Thomas was satisfied. Then he had a little refreshment himself, while Thomas turned out his pockets. "I'll let them go now," he said. One of his wood lice, however, stayed motionless where he put it. "What's the matter with it?" said William, curiously. "I expect Ms. the matter with it," said Thomas succinctly. "Now, get me some little fishes, and tadpoles, and water things," he went on cheerfully. William turned round from his blackberry bush. "Well, I won't," he said decidedly. "I've had enough." "You've had enough breakfast," said Thomas sternly. "I've found a little tin for the things, so be quick." "Oh, here's a fly. A green fly. It's sitting on my finger. Does it like me 'cause it's sitting on my finger?" "No," said William, turning a purple, stained face round scornfully. "It must be nearly night." He didn't want to be too hard on them, to make his mother ill or anything. He wanted to be as kind as possible. He'd forgive them at once when he got home. He'd ask for one or two things he wanted, as well as the new bugle. A new penknife, and an engine with a real boiler. "Why does it not like me?" persisted Thomas. William was silent. Question and questioner were beneath contempt. "Why does it not like me?" he shouted stridently. Flies don't like people, silly. Why not? Retorted Thomas. They don't know anything about them. Well, I'll tell it about me. My name's Thomas, he said to the fly politely. Now does it like me? William groaned. But the fly had now vanished, and Thomas once more grew impatient. Come on, he said. Come on and find things for me. William's manly spirit was by this time so far broken that he followed his new acquaintance to a neighboring pond, growling threateningly but impotently. Now, commanded his small tyrant, take off your boots and stockings and go and find things for me. Take off yours, growled William, and find things for yourself. No, said Thomas, crocodiles might be there and bite my toes. If you don't go in, I'll scream and scream and scream. William went in. He walked gingerly about the muddy pond. Thomas watched him critically from the bank. I don't like your hair, he said confidingly. William growled. He caught various small swimming objects in the tin and brought them to the bank for inspection. I want more than that, said Thomas calmly. Well, you won't get it, retorted William. He began to put on his boots and stockings, wondering desperately how to rid himself of his unwanted companion. But fate solved the problem. With a loud cry, a woman came running down the path. Tommy, she said. My little darling Tommy. I thought you were lost. She turned furiously to William. You ought to be ashamed of yourself, she said. A great boy of your age leading a little child like this into mischief. If his father was here, he'd show you. You ought to know better, and you a scout. William gasped. Well, he said. And I've been doing deeds of kindness on him all morning. She turned away indignantly, holding Thomas's hand. You're never to go with that nasty rough boy again, darling, she said. Got lots of wasps and some fishes, murmured Thomas contentedly. They disappeared down the path. With a feeling of depression and disillusionment, William turned to go home. Then his spirits rose. After all, he'd got rid of Thomas, and he was going home to a contrite family. It must be about supper time. It would be getting dark soon. But it still stayed light a long time now. It wouldn't matter if he just got in for supper. It would have given them time to think things over. He could see his father speaking unsteadily and holding out his hand. My boy, let bygones be bygones, if there is anything you want. His father had never said anything of this sort to him yet, but, by a violent stretch of imagination, he could just conceive it. His mother, of course, would cry over him, and so would Ethel. Dear William, do forgive us. We have been so miserable since you went away. We will never treat you so again. This again was unlike the Ethel he knew, but sorrow has a refining effect on all characters. He entered the gate self-consciously. Ethel was at the front door. She looked at his torn shirt and mud, sweat-covered knees. "You'd better hurry if you're going to be ready for lunch," she said coldly. "Lunch?" faltered William. "What time is it?" 10 to 1. "Father's in, so I warn you," she added unpleasantly. He entered the house in a dazed fashion. His mother was in the hall. "William," she said impatiently. "Another shirt torn. You really are careless. You'll have to stop being a scout if that's the way you treat your clothes. And look at your knees." Pale and speechless, he went towards the stairs. His father was coming out of the library smoking a pipe. He looked at his son grimly. "If you aren't downstairs cleaned by the time the lunch bell goes, my son," he said, "you won't see that bugle of yours this side of Christmas." William swallowed. "Yes, Father," he said meekly. He went slowly upstairs to the bathroom. Life was a rotten show.